blind eye. And, Mr Speaker, National has started 2017 the way that they plan to continue, by ignoring the massive issues, the important issues that New Zealand is facing at this time. So today's State of the Nation report, released by the Salvation Army, aptly titled "Off the Tracks," shows just how out of touch this government is. The findings of this report are alarming, Mr Speaker, and this House should be ashamed of what was in that report and where New Zealand is at. New Zealand has had such consistently high levels of child poverty that it has now become entrenched and normalised in our society. The lack of affordable housing has resulted in a level of homelessness not seen in New Zealand in the lifetime of most Kiwis. And on top of that, we have record levels of imprisonment and recidivism, Mr Speaker. This all comes despite the apparent positive economic growth and welfare reforms claiming to target those in need. In his statement, the Prime Minister continues to applaud his government's efforts at cutting social support for Kiwis in need and reducing benefit numbers. Yet these very policies, Mr Speaker, are shown by the Salvation Army's report to be the crux of child poverty issues. The increasingly conditional nature of welfare leaves many families without any financial support. Working for family support has been cut, despite this having had a positive effect on low-income families when Labor implemented it. The government is also making it harder for people to get onto benefits, and even making it a struggle for some to get into Work and Income New Zealand offices, Mr Speaker. And there is an assumption out there that the fabricated group and perceived group of welfare bludgers or beneficiaries that could be working or should be working are the only ones accessing support. They are a mythical fabrication invented by the national government, and in fact there are a large number of New Zealanders, Mr Speaker, who have to access welfare, or who have to access those WINS offices, including people with disability, including our solo mothers, including unemployed men, and including our senior citizens, Mr Speaker. So it's unfortunate that recently I heard from a senior citizen, a woman called Alexis. All she wanted to do, a 70-year-old woman, was drop off her change in bank details to her local WINS office. She gets there, she gets asked for ID, not knowing why, not knowing what they'll do with it, not knowing what they'll do when they find out she is who she is. She struggles to get through the door. She gets in the door, nowhere to put her change of bank details, told by the security guard, if you leave them there, there is no guarantee that anyone will read it. She's then yelled at by someone else behind the barrier. If you leave it there, there's no guarantee that anyone will read it. And that 70-year-old woman stated on her Radio New Zealand interview that she had worked for over 50 years paying her taxes. Now she just wants to be able to work and walk into a government agency, get the respect and dignity that any New Zealander deserves. If she hadn't had to go there, she wouldn't have known what other New Zealanders have to put up with, and she said it was unacceptable. Mr Speaker, the government remains solely focused on reducing benefit numbers, yet they still fail to collect the information on the outcomes of individuals who do go off the benefit. The current insecurity and instability in the labour market means that stable, well-paid employment is not guaranteed. The working poor demographic in New Zealand is growing, with many parents taking on multiple jobs and still struggling to make ends meet. The Salvation Army report shows that over the last 5 years, despite benefit numbers going down, child poverty has remained high. Yet this is glossed over with political rhetoric about reducing benefit dependency, Mr Speaker. By focusing only on reducing benefit numbers, the wider and more entrenched issues are ignored, and instead we are left with high rates of child poverty, inequality and continuous benefit cycles, Mr Speaker. We also see alarmingly high rates of youth who are not in employment and training, and that's despite the Minister of Education telling us how successful our young people are. In fact, Mr Speaker, our NEET figures, so our figures of young people who are not in employment or in education, have increased to 90,000 now. That's an increase from 20,000 since a year ago. A year ago it was 70,000, now it's 90,000. But what else could we expect, really, from a government who has a leader who talks about young people in a demeaning way, referring to them as pretty damned hopeless, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the lack of concern for vulnerable people epitomises this government. The social investment approach they're claiming to use is just empty rhetoric. A real investment approach would tackle child poverty to prevent the long-term damaging impacts of growing up in hardship. But the government is refusing to even measure child poverty, let alone attempt to reduce it. And we heard that from the Minister today. She said there were lots of different ways to measure it and refuses to just pick one. Refuses to be accountable for this really important issue. Refuses to work with other political parties to not only measure child poverty, but actually come up with some targets, Mr Speaker, so that we can actually try and start to eradicate it. A real investment approach would be focused on breaking the cycle of poverty. Instead, this government is removing support, ignoring long-term outcomes and leaving more people trapped in poverty. Another area, Mr Speaker, that the government has failed to invest in, and all New Zealanders, the only ones who aren't aware of this is the government, and that is housing. So the lack of affordable housing available has led to an unprecedented rise in homelessness. The last figures we saw were 41,000, but actually Alan Johnson, at the launch of the Salvation Army report this morning, said that that 41,000 is a mass underestimation of what the issue really is, or how bad the problem really is. And, Mr Speaker, there is more proof that coming off a benefit does not guarantee you will get out of poverty anymore. For those who find themselves living in cars, in June last year, it took on average 217 days for those people to be housed. Yet the government seems to think that if they don't acknowledge the problem, it won't exist. In fact, the Deputy Prime Minister went on TV last year and said that her biggest accomplishment as the Social Housing Minister was moving people from cars into houses. Mr Speaker, we see the stats. It's taking 217 days to house a person who's living in a car. And what makes it worse is that a year before that stat came out, it was only 108 days. So I don't know how the Deputy Prime Minister can claim that as any sort of accomplishment. In fact, I think she's got nothing to be proud of at all. And when I look more closely at an example in my own electorate about how the housing system is failing, it's pretty apparent when we look at the case of a woman called Tracy Penny, a tetraplegic woman with a 4-year-old daughter and a husband who is her caregiver, who has been on the Housing New Zealand waiting list for over a year, was homeless, living in her modified van for 6 weeks, had to come and see her Member of Parliament, who happened to be an opposition Member of Parliament, and then get some media attention before the government even did anything to actually support that family, Mr Speaker. The embarrassing thing is that this woman was told that there were no modified houses available in the Housing New Zealand stock, so she'd just have to wait. And 2 days after she came to my office, first to bring this to my attention, my office ends up having to support another family who have no one in the family with a disability, but are taken to a fully modified house and told, take this house, otherwise we'll put down that you declined it. And after a conversation with Housing New Zealand, where we all decided this was an inappropriate option, because actually this was set up for someone who needed wheelchair access, that offer was withdrawn. That family ended up getting another house, and then, after being told there were no modified houses, Tracy Penny ended up getting a house immediately. But let's not underestimate why that happened. That happened because there was media attention and she had an opposition MP involved. It shouldn't take that for the government to spring into action. But all of us on this side of the House are seeing that happen far too often, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, until the media get involved, then there's very little action that government is undertaking. So we know what the major issues are facing the country, and we aren't afraid to act on them, Mr Speaker. Bill English, however, in his Prime Minister's statement, ignored the housing crisis, ignored inequality and ignored the plight of children living in poverty. That's not what a leader would have done.
Scott Simpson.
Mr Speaker, at the beginning of the parliamentary year, I'd just like to acknowledge you and the other presiding officers and fellow members across the House and welcome them back to